or is it covalent? And to answer that, Lane, what do you look at?
Does it start with a metal or a non-metal?
If it starts with a metal, it is
Ionic.
and if it starts with a non-metal, it is.
Covalent.
So we have finished the ionic side. Okay? At this point, you've had a lot of practice naming and writing formulas for ionic 2. Like I'm assuming you know how to do that. If you're stuck, we need to get some extra time in together or something, because that's something I'm counting on you doing. We're going to start the other side today, where we have now determined that the compound is covalent. And how do we determine if it's covalent?
Is it a non-metal? If it's a non-metal.
It starts with a non-metal. Now, a first question I want you guys to ask is, does the compound start with hydrogen? And how do you know that? What's the symbol for hydrogen?
H.
Capital H. Not capital H-E, right? It's got to be a capital H. If there's a lowercase letter after it, it's not hydrogen. Okay. If the answer is yes, then what you know is the compound is an acid. And I want you to notice, because there's a reason I'm doing this. I'm putting our acids right up next to the fold. To be clear, they're still on the right-hand side because they're covalent, but acids also have some properties in common with ionics. Acids are covalent compounds. When they're in their pure form by themselves, they form covalent bonds. But the minute you put them in water, they come apart and they become ionic. So there's a little bit of both going on there. Okay? Now, once you know it's an acid, the next question is the compound binary or polyatomic? Now, this polyatomic goes right back to the ones you've already learned. And it works that way because, like I said, acids are kind of ionic. Okay? So if a compound is let's do polyatomic first. If a compound is polyatomic, then you're going to have to identify, does it contain the ate form of the ion, or does it contain the ite form of the ion? Teresa, would you give me an example of an ate ion? Sulfate. Very good. So, for example, sulfate is SO4 2 minus. Now there's, oops, you know what? I'm sorry. I'm going to do a few examples, and I don't have anything wrong with you writing one or two examples here, but don't like fill up your whole page, because there's other stuff we still have to do on the covalent side, okay? Sulfate 8 is SO4 2 minus. And there's two things I want to show you here. This goes back to that ionic part. If the charge is 2 minus, there's going to be 2 hydrogens to balance that charge out. So that's how we write acidic formulas. We put the number of hydrogens to match the charge. But now, oh my gosh, I still got ahead of myself. If it's an 8, we're going to make it an ic acid. If it's an ite, we're going to make it an us acid, O-U-S. So, if this is sulfate, it's going to become I get why you said sulfic, and I wouldn't mark that wrong, 'cause I see what you did there.
Sulfuric acid?
Sulfuric acid. It just kind of rolls off the tongue better.
Well, sulfate is sulfur.
Yeah. Sure.
What does the second one say?
OUS. So let's do an ite then. If sulfate is SO4 2 minus, what would sulfite be?
SO3 2 minus.
SO3 2 minus. So how many H's would that be?
3.
2. The charge is 2 minus 2 H's. Okay. So instead of sulfite, we're going to change it to us at the end. So instead of sulfuric, it's going to be sulfurous acid.
What's the difference?
1 oxygen.
Does the one oxygen make it less or more volatile?
Volatile is not the word you're looking for there.
Caustic.
Reactive, caustic is a good
Caustic.
word.
Yeah.
This is much more caustic, yeah.
Is it OUS?
It is. OUS. Us. Us. So, the 8 form became ic, sulfuric acid, and the ite form became us, sulfurous acid. Let's try that again. Someone give me another 8 form. What's that? Yeah, another one. I hear what? Chlorate. Nitrate's a good one too, but let's do chlorate first. What charge does chlorate have? -1. Gotta know. So if it's -1, how many hydrogens? Just one. HClO3. And this is chlorate. So now, as an acid, we're gonna call it not is, it's the 8 form, so chloric acid. And there was really nothing wrong with the nitrate, but I'm gonna make an example out of this in just a moment. So if chlorate is ClO3, what's chlorite? ClO2, 1 minus, which means how many hydrogens? And now, since we know it's chlorite, we're gonna name it chlorous acid. Are you, Sammy, getting this? Derek, you good? Okay. Let's go back up to the binary ones then. What does binary mean?
Single? Bi, 2.
2. So for example, binary code is written entirely in
Ones and zeros, 2
ones
characters.
and zeros, only 2 characters, 2 symbols. Binary means 2, so in this case we're talking about 2 elements. And we already know what the first one is. We've already established that the compound starts with hydrogen. So that means it's going to be hydrogen and one other element. If that's the case, we're going to name it hydro, whatever the element is, ic acid. So, for example, let's start with Cl. Oh, you know what? We got these right here. Let's do S. What charge does sulfur tend to have? -2. So that means, if this is -2, how many hydrogens? 2 of them. So how am I gonna, it's binary, there's only 2 elements. So how am I gonna name it?
Hydrosulfuric.
Hydrosulfuric acid. Which makes it, sorry, didn't want to run into that other one. Which makes it different than sulfuric acid. When you hear the hydro, what does that tell you?
It has hydrogen.
So does sulfuric acid, and that doesn't have hydro. When you hear hydro, what should you think to yourself? It is binary. It's not a polyatomic ion. Hydro is your clue that there's only 2 elements. I want you to see how critical it is that we don't use the same name for these. We don't have anyone in this class with the same name, do we? Oh, we do, huh? We did. How do we deal with that? We didn't very well.
Alexa, well, it's always just been Alexa C and then the other Alexa C. Oh.
Yeah, right?
You can only ever, well, they look
In,
different.
in
It's
period
fine.
3, I have 2 Phoebes. And actually, one Phoebe came to me and wanted to go by her middle name instead because it stressed her out every time I said Phoebe because she didn't know which one I was talking to. Should I answer or should I stay still? Right? And what I'm getting at is having the same name for 2 different things is confusing. Which is why we have this naming system that has different names because they're different. I know they both have sulfuric in them. But hydrosulfuric tells you that it's binary, H2S. And just sulfuric acid with no hydro tells you that it's polyatomic. If it's an acid, but it doesn't start with hydro, it's got a polyatomic ion in it. One of your flashcards, right? Or one of that fold sheet. HCl, what's the name for that?
Hydrochloric.
Hydrochloric. It starts with the H, check. It's binary, it's only 2 elements, check. So it's hydrochloric acid. Very different from chloric acid.
It's more caustic.
Much more. Hydrochloric acid is very, very acidic.
It's the best way to dispose of a body.
No. Not, I'm not gonna finish that statement.
He's like, I knew.
Is he right or wrong?
Just
Okay.
put all the stuff in a barrel, even the belts will melt.
Do we get this? Not in hydrochloric acid, they won't.
Okay, what
Hydrochloric
do you
acid
require?
does not break
Figs or
down.
hydrochloric acid?
Like hydrochloric acid will break down all the fats in the body. It won't break down all the proteins, it won't break down the calcium, like it won't break everything down. You need other acids for the bones.
You know, we'll do that then, a pig.
If I was gonna dispose of a body, I'd probably use a pig before I use acid.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
I would throw the clothes and like some of the tools in hydrochloric acid to clean off all the.
Let's
DNA
not have this
elements.
conversation on video.
Oh yeah, you're recording.
Alright.
Wow, everyone's gonna think we're complete psychopaths
Cut the
here.
camera, cut the
No,
camera.
no, 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 no.
Hey, would you
We
stop
actually
it?
tested and we
Yeah, we